The emergency broadcast crackled across 17 star systems simultaneously. Ambassador Kalathi of the Zephyrian Council pressed her four-fingered hands against the communication console, her silver skin pale with desperation. Behind her, the ornate chamber of the Galactic Assembly buzzed with frantic voices speaking in dozens of alien tongues. "This is an urgent plea to all member species of the Galactic Coalition." Kalathi spoke into the transmitter, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "The Devourers have broken through the Outer Rim defenses. 3 entire systems have gone dark in the past rotation. We are requesting immediate military assistance from any civilization capable of mounting a defense." The holographic display above the assembly floor showed the advancing crimson markers representing the Devourer fleet. Each red dot meant death for billions. The insectoid creatures had appeared from the void beyond known space 6 months ago, consuming everything in their path. Their bioships grew stronger with each world they consumed, each life they extinguished. Captain Vorthak of the Krellian Navy stepped forward, his reptilian features grim. "Ambassador, my fleet stands ready, but we've seen what happens to conventional forces against these creatures. They adapt to our weapons faster than we can develop new ones. Our plasma cannons barely scratch their hulls, and their acid attacks melt through our strongest shields." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. The Aquarian delegation's translucent forms shimmered with fear, while the stone-like geologians shifted uncomfortably, their crystalline bodies reflecting the red warning lights. What about the humans? The question came from Ambassador Nexus, the cybernetic representative of the synthetic collective. His mechanical voice carried a strange note of hope. "Have we contacted Terra?" Uncomfortable silence fell over the assembly. The humans were the newest members of the coalition, having joined only 50 years ago. Most species still considered them primitives, violent, short-lived creatures from a death world that somehow managed to achieve faster-than-light travel. Kalathi's expression darkened. "The human representative Jenkins assured us that Terra would look into the situation. That was 3 days ago. We've heard nothing since." "Typical humans," sneered General Thorax of the Arachnid Confederacy, his mandibles clicking dismissively. "They talk big but disappear when real fighting begins. I told you admitting them to the coalition was a mistake." Ambassador Nexus tilted his metallic head. "Perhaps. But their military records from the integration wars were interesting. They achieved victory ratios that shouldn't have been possible with their technology level." "Beginner's luck." Thorax waved a claw dismissively. "Besides, what could they possibly contribute? They have maybe 200 ships in their entire fleet. The Devourers are fielding thousands." The debate was interrupted by a new voice from the communication array. "Galactic Assembly, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force. We've received your transmission." Kalathi practically lunged at the console. "Admiral Chen, thank the stars. What forces can Terra contribute to our defense? Every ship counts now." There was a pause, filled only with static. When Chen's voice returned, it carried an odd tone. "Ambassador, we're not sending ships." The assembly erupted. Delegates shouted across species barriers, their translation devices struggling to keep up with the cascade of outrage and despair. "I knew it!" Thorax's voice cut above the noise. "Cowards! When the galaxy needs them, humans show their true nature." Kalathi raised her hands for silence, her silver skin now completely pale. "Admiral, surely you understand the situation. The Devourers have consumed entire worlds. There are only 3 systems from the core worlds now. If they reach the industrial centers—" "We understand perfectly, Ambassador," Chen interrupted, her voice calm. "We're not sending ships because ships aren't what's needed here." Confusion replaced anger in the chamber. Ambassador Nexus leaned forward, his optical sensors focusing intently on the speaker. "Admiral, perhaps you could clarify. The Devourers are biomechanical entities operating with hive mind intelligence, Chen explained, her words measured and precise. They adapt to threats by evolving their defensive and offensive capabilities in real time. Traditional fleet engagements play to their strengths. They want you to meet them in open space with massed formations. Captain Vorthak's tail lashed with frustration. Then what do you suggest? We can't just let them advance unopposed. You won't be, Chen replied. Terra is sending something else, something the Devourers won't expect and can't adapt to quickly enough. And what exactly is that? Kalathi asked, hope and skepticism warring in her voice. The pause stretched longer this time. When Chen spoke again, there was something almost apologetic in her tone. We're sending the Guardians. Silence fell over the assembly like a physical weight. Species that had existed for millennia, that had explored galaxies and built wonders beyond imagination, found themselves speechless. Finally, General Thorax broke the quiet. The what? Some kind of new ship class? Advanced AI, perhaps? Not exactly, Chen said. The Guardians are, well, they're humans, very specific humans. Teams that have been preparing for scenarios exactly like this one. The laughter that followed was bitter and desperate. Ambassador Nexus was the first to regain composure. Admiral, with respect, how many of these Guardians are you sending? A few thousand? 10,000? 12. The silence returned, heavier than before. Kalathi stared at the communication console as if it had betrayed her. Admiral, did you say 12? As in the number 12? 12 teams, yes. 72 individuals total. Thorax's mandibles clattered with what might have been laughter or rage. 72 humans? Against a fleet of thousands? Admiral, this is either a joke in very poor taste or evidence that your species has finally lost what little sanity it possessed. I understand your skepticism, Chen replied evenly. But these aren't regular humans. The Guardians are selected from our most elite units and trained for impossible situations. Each team operates independently, using tactics and equipment specifically designed for asymmetric warfare against superior numbers. Ambassador Kalathi closed her eyes, trying to process what she was hearing. When she opened them, her expression was carefully neutral. Admiral, forgive me, but our simulations show that the approaching Devourer fleet contains approximately 4 million combat organisms across 3,000 bioships. How do you propose that 72 individuals, regardless of their training, could possibly impact such numbers? Because, Chen said, and now there was definitely something else in her voice, something that made several delegates step back from their consoles instinctively. The Guardians aren't planning to fight the fleet. They're planning to hunt the queens. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. Every species present knew about the Devourer queens, the massive central organisms that controlled entire fleets through bio-neural links. But the queens were protected at the heart of their formations, surrounded by thousands of lesser creatures and layers of bio-armor that could withstand direct hits from capital ship weapons. That's impossible, Captain Vorthak whispered. The queens are deeper inside those formations than the core of a neutron star. Nothing gets close to them. We've lost entire squadrons just trying to penetrate the outer defensive rings. Yes, Chen agreed. That's because you've been thinking like conventional military forces. You attack their strengths, engage their defenses, fight the war they want you to fight. The Guardians don't work that way. How do they work? Ambassador Nexus asked, his mechanical voice unusually quiet. Chen's response came after another long pause. Have you ever heard the human phrase, ghost in the machine? Before anyone could answer, new alarms began blaring throughout the chamber. The holographic display updated with fresh data that turned several delegates' skin colors to shades of fear. Emergency transmission from the Sentinel Station, a technician called out. The Devourers have accelerated their advance. They're moving through the Proxima cluster ahead of schedule. Kalathi's hands flew over her console, calling up tactical displays. What she saw made her step backward in shock. They've consumed the entire cluster in less than 6 hours. That's not possible. It should have taken them days to process that much biomass. They're adapting faster. Admiral Chen's voice cut through the panic. Learning to process organic matter more efficiently. At this rate, they'll reach the core worlds in 48 hours instead of the projected 7 days. The chamber erupted again, but this time, the voices carried pure terror. Species that had lived in peace for centuries suddenly faced extinction in a matter of days. "How long until your guardians arrive?" Kalathi shouted above the noise. "They're already en route," Chen replied. "Estimated arrival at the Devourer formation in 18 hours. General Thorax's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. 18 hours? You mean your 72 humans will reach the enemy before our combined fleets can even mobilize?" "How is that possible?" Captain Vorthak demanded. "What kind of ships are they using?" "Ships that don't appear on your sensors," Chen said simply. "Ships designed by a species that spent its entire evolutionary history being hunted by things bigger, stronger, and more numerous than themselves. We learned that sometimes the best way to survive isn't to be the strongest or the fastest. Sometimes you need to be invisible." Ambassador Nexus processed this information with mechanical precision. "You're using stealth technology, but the Devourers have demonstrated ability to detect ships across multiple spectrums. Their biosensors are incredibly sophisticated." "They can detect ships, yes," Chen agreed. "But the Guardians aren't traveling in ships, not in any way you'd recognize." The questions multiplied faster than any translator could handle, but Chen's voice cut through them all with sudden urgency. "I'm sorry, but I need to cut this transmission short. The Guardians are beginning their approach, and they'll need complete communication silence from this point forward. Any electromagnetic signature could compromise their insertion." "Wait!" Kalathi called out. "How will we know if they succeed? How will we even know if they survive the attempt?" The static stretched for so long that many thought the connection had been lost. When Chen's voice returned, it was barely above a whisper, but somehow every being in the chamber heard it clearly. "You'll know," she said. "When the Guardians begin their hunt, the entire galaxy will know." The transmission ended, leaving the Galactic Assembly in stunned silence. Outside the chamber's viewing ports, the stars continued their ancient dance, unaware that in a few short hours, either salvation or extinction would arrive on wings darker than the void between worlds. Ambassador Kalathi stared at the darkened communication console, her reflection ghostly in its black surface. Around her, the greatest minds of galactic civilization struggled to comprehend what they had just heard. 72 humans against 4 million devourers. It should have been laughable. So why did she feel like she had just witnessed the moment when predators learned they could become prey? The countdown to first contact had begun, and somewhere in the darkness between stars, the Guardians were coming. The bioship consumption stretched across 17 kilometers of void space, its living hull pulsing with the rhythm of a massive heart. Veins of bioluminescent fluid coursed beneath its translucent skin, carrying nutrients harvested from a dozen dead worlds. At its center, protected by layers of bone-like armor and surrounded by chambers filled with warrior drones, Queen Vrexhai contemplated her next meal. The Queen was ancient even by Devourer standards, her consciousness spanning 3,000 years of consumption across multiple galaxies. Her massive form filled the central chamber, tentacles thick as starship hulls extending into neural interfaces that connected her to every creature in her fleet. Through thousands of biomechanical eyes, she saw the galaxy spread before her like a banquet. The smaller species, those who called themselves the Galactic Coalition, had amused her with their initial resistance. Their weapons had stung briefly, like insects biting a giant, before her children adapted and overcame them. Now these prey creatures were fleeing toward their inner worlds, just as countless others had done before them. Soon she would feast on their industrial worlds, absorbing technologies that would make her fleet even stronger. After that, their core worlds would provide billions of delicious life forces to sustain her expansion into the next galaxy. The pattern was always the same: resist, adapt, flee, die, feed. Through her bio-neural network, HFY felt her children's hunger. 3 million warrior drones, each the size of a small corvette, filled the spaces around her ship like a living cloud. Smaller scout organisms darted between the larger vessels, their senses probing space for any sign of prey or threat. The Queen was reviewing digestion reports from the recently consumed Proxima cluster when her sensory web detected something unusual. A faint electromagnetic anomaly had appeared at the edge of her formation's sensor range. Not a ship signature, but something far more subtle. HFY extended her consciousness through the network, commanding her scout organisms to investigate. What they found puzzled her ancient mind. There was nothing there, no ships, no energy signatures, no gravitational disturbances. Yet something had triggered her peripheral sensors, something too fleeting to identify. As she pondered this mystery, similar anomalies began appearing throughout her fleet formation. Always at the edges, always just beyond clear detection. Her scouts rushed to each location only to find empty space. The Queen's massive intellect, capable of coordinating millions of organisms simultaneously, focused on this puzzle. In 3,000 years of conquest, she had learned to trust her instincts. Something was wrong. 40,000 kilometers away, suspended in the void, wearing nothing but an advanced EVA suit, Master Sergeant Marcus Kane watched the Devourer formation through his helmet's heads-up display. The suit's adaptive camouflage field bent light around him, making him effectively invisible to both visual and most electronic detection methods. More importantly, its bio-dampening systems masked his life signs from the Devourer's organic sensors. Kane had been drifting for 6 hours, using micro-thrusters to position himself within the enemy formation. His suit's system showed him as a small piece of space debris, too insignificant to warrant attention from the massive bioships. Around him, 11 other Guardians had taken similar positions throughout the fleet. "Guardian 6 to all units," Kane whispered into his comm system. The transmission masked by quantum encryption and transmitted via tight beam laser to avoid detection. "I have visual on the primary target. Queenship confirmed at grid 77 Alpha. Guardian 2 confirmed secondary target at grid 32 Beta," came the reply from Lieutenant Sarah Cross, positioned 15,000 kilometers to Kane's left. "Bioship shows heavy escort presence. Count approximately 400 warrior drones in close formation." One by one, the other Guardians checked in, each confirming their positions within different sections of the massive fleet. They had spent 18 hours infiltrating the formation, moving slowly and carefully to avoid detection. Now they were distributed throughout the Devourer fleet like viruses in a bloodstream. "Guardian Actual to all units," came the voice of Colonel James Mitchell, the mission commander. "Phase 1 complete. All teams report ready status for Phase 2. Kane checked his equipment one final time. The device attached to his suit's chest was no bigger than a briefcase, but it contained technology that the galaxy's greatest scientists said was impossible. The quantum disruption charges had been developed in the deepest black sites of Earth's military-industrial complex, designed specifically for biological targets that could adapt to conventional weapons. "Guardian 6 ready," Kane reported. "Guardian 7 ready," confirmed Sergeant Lisa Chen from her position near another Queen ship. The confirmations continued until all 12 teams had reported in. Each team consisted of 6 Guardians, and each Guardian carried enough quantum disruption charges to cripple a bioship the size of a small moon. "Execute Phase 2, Mitchell commanded. Kane activated his suit's propulsion system and began moving toward his target. The bioship loomed ahead of him like a living mountain, its surface writhing with sensory organs and defensive systems. Warrior drones patrolled in complex patterns around the massive vessel, their blade-like appendages gleaming in the light of distant stars. The trick wasn't avoiding the drones, it was becoming part of the environment they were guarding. Kane's suit analyzed the bioship's surface composition and adjusted his camouflage accordingly. To any observer, he now appeared to be a small piece of organic debris that had broken away from the ship's hull. As he approached the bioship's surface, Kane could see the thousands of smaller organisms that served as the ship's external immune system. Creatures like organic antibodies crawled across the hull, seeking out foreign objects or signs of damage. Kane's suit had been designed to fool even these biological sensors, mimicking the chemical signatures of the ship's own organic components. He landed on the hull with the gentleness of settling dust, magnetic clamps engaging to keep him anchored. Through the translucent skin beneath him, he could see the massive circulatory system that kept the bioship alive. Nutrients flowed through channels wide enough to drive a tank through, while smaller vessels carried oxygen and waste products throughout the organism. Kane activated his suit's bioscanner and began searching for the optimal insertion point. The intel from Earth's xenobiologists had been invaluable. Every Devourer bioship followed the same basic structure, with the Queen's chamber located at the geometric center and connected to the ship's vital systems through redundant bio-neural pathways. Guardian 6 to actual, Kane whispered. Beginning penetration sequence. The tools built into his suit were unlike anything in the Coalition's arsenal. Instead of trying to cut through the bioship's defenses, they worked with them. Nanoscale infiltrators, designed to mimic beneficial bacteria, began breaking down a small section of the ship's skin. To the bioship's immune system, it would appear as normal cellular recycling. Kane slipped through the opening he had created and found himself in one of the ship's circulatory channels. The walls around him pulsed with life, and organic fluid flowed past him like a river. His suit's analysis showed the fluid contained nutrients extracted from the consumed worlds, a sobering reminder of what was at stake. Following his suit's navigation system, Kane began moving toward the ship's center. The journey would take him through kilometers of living tissue, past defensive organs that could detect and destroy intruders. But his suit had been designed by humans who understood that sometimes the best way to hide was to look exactly like what your enemy expected to see. Meanwhile, throughout the Devourer fleet, 11 other Guardians were conducting similar infiltrations. Each bioship was unique, evolved for different purposes within the swarm, but all followed the same basic pattern. Sarah Cross was moving through respiratory channels in her target, breathing air that had been processed by organs the size of buildings. Miguel Santos was navigating neural pathways in another ship, following connections that carried thoughts and commands between the Queen and her servants. The Guardians had trained for this mission in environments that most species couldn't even imagine. Earth's deepest ocean trenches, where pressure could crush starships. Cave systems where navigation required moving through spaces barely wider than a human body. Volcanic regions, where toxic gases and extreme temperatures simulated the interior of alien organisms. But this was different. This was real. Each Guardian was alone inside a living entity, powerful enough to destroy planets, surrounded by immune systems that had evolved over millions of years to detect and eliminate threats. Kane reached a major junction in the circulatory system and paused to check his position. According to his suit's mapping system, he was now only 2 kilometers from the Queen's chamber. The bio-neural pathways were growing denser here, and he could feel the ship's awareness pressing against his consciousness like a vast alien presence. Guardian 6 approaching primary target zone, he reported. Initiating final approach sequence. Copy that, came Mitchell's voice. All teams, Prepare for synchronized deployment. We go in 60 seconds. All targets simultaneously. Kane pulled the quantum disruption charge from his suit and began configuring it for maximum effect. The device would disrupt the quantum bonds that held the Queen's bio-neural network together, causing a cascade failure that would spread throughout the ship's systems. The death would be quick by cosmic standards. The entire bioship would die in less than 30 seconds. 30 seconds, Mitchell announced. Kane activated the charge and began moving toward the Queen's chamber. Around him, the bioship's internal systems pulsed with increasing agitation. Somehow, the organism sensed that something was wrong, though it couldn't identify the threat. 10 seconds. The Queen's chamber appeared ahead of him, a vast organic cavern filled with the massive form of HFY herself. The ancient creature's tentacles stretched throughout the space, connecting to neural interfaces that sparkled with bioelectric activity. Her eyes, each larger than Kane's entire body, swept back and forth as she searched for the source of her growing unease. 5 seconds. Kane reached the optimal deployment position and activated the charge's timer. Around him, the chamber's walls began to glow as the Queen's agitation increased. Somewhere in her ancient consciousness, HFY was beginning to understand that death had come for her. Execute, Mitchell commanded. Kane released the quantum disruption charge and activated his suit's emergency egress system. Around the Devourer fleet, 11 other Guardians did the same, each delivering death to a queen that had lived for millennia. The effects were immediate and devastating. As the quantum disruptions took hold, the bio-neural networks that connected each queen to her ship began to collapse. 3,000-year-old consciousness fragmented into chaos as quantum bonds dissolved at the molecular level. Queen HFY's death scream echoed through dimensions that most species couldn't perceive, but every Guardian felt it as a pressure wave that seemed to shake reality itself. The massive bioship convulsed around Kane as its central nervous system died, sending shock waves through every cell and organ. But the Guardians were already moving. Their suits' emergency systems launched them away from the dying bioships at velocities that would have been fatal without their advanced protection. Behind them, 12 of the most powerful entities in the galaxy died in synchronized agony, their death throes sending waves of confusion and terror through the remaining fleet. As the Queen's ships began their final death spirals, their warrior drones found themselves suddenly cut off from the guiding intelligence that had controlled their every action. Millions of biomechanical creatures, each one a formidable opponent, suddenly found themselves operating on nothing but base instinct. And that's when the Devourer fleet learned the difference between fighting as a coordinated force and dying as mindless animals. The Guardians had completed their primary mission, but their work was far from over. As they rocketed away from the dying bioships, each team began activating secondary charges they had planted throughout the fleet. These weren't quantum disruptors. They were something far more insidious. Nanoscale biological agents designed to look exactly like beneficial bacteria, but programmed to consume the organic components that held the bioships together. Within minutes, the entire Devourer fleet would begin to digest itself from the inside out. 12 bioships died in the first wave, their queen's death screams echoing through the void. Hundreds more would follow as the biological agents spread through the fleet like wildfire. In less than an hour, the greatest threat the galaxy had ever seen would become nothing but organic debris floating in the darkness. And somewhere in that debris field, 12 teams of humans in impossible suits would rendezvous with extraction ships that were already moving to collect them. They had done what no fleet in the galaxy could accomplish. They had proven that sometimes, when the impossible is necessary, you don't send an army, you send the Guardians. The first sign that something had gone catastrophically wrong came through the Devourer fleet's bio-neural network like a scream made of lightning. Across 3,000 bioships, millions of warrior drones suddenly stopped their coordinated patrol patterns and began spinning aimlessly in space, their connection to Central Command severed without warning. Sub-Queen Kethara felt the death of her sisters like physical blows to her consciousness. 12 of the eldest queens, including the mighty Vrexhai who had led their species for millennia, simply vanished from the network in a span of seconds. Not destroyed by weapons, vanished, as if they had never existed. From her position aboard the bioship Eternal Hunger, Kethara tried to maintain control of her section of the fleet. But the panic spreading through the network was unlike anything she had experienced in her 800 years of existence. Warriors that had fought with perfect coordination for centuries were now attacking each other in confusion, their biomechanical brains unable to process the sudden absence of their guiding intelligence. "All queens, maintain formation control," she broadcast through the remaining network links, her mental voice carrying across hundreds of ships. "Re-establish communication with forward elements." "We must!" Her command was cut short as another wave of deaths rippled through the fleet. 3 more queen ships went silent simultaneously, their massive forms beginning to convulse as their internal systems collapsed. Kethara watched in horror as the bioship Devourer of Worlds, a vessel that had consumed 30 planets in its lifetime, began to literally tear itself apart from the inside. Through her ship's sensory organs, she could see thousands of warrior drones flying in erratic patterns, some attacking their own allies in mindless fury. The beautiful coordination that had made their species the perfect predator was dissolving into chaos. "Emergency combat protocol," Kethara commanded, trying to override the spreading panic. "All remaining queens, establish independent control zones. Isolate your sections from the failing network links." But even as she spoke, she could feel something wrong within her own ship. The organic walls around her chamber were beginning to show patches of discoloration, and several of her neural interfaces reported fluctuating connections. Something was eating away at her ship's internal structure, something too small for her biosensors to identify. 30,000 kilometers away, Colonel James Mitchell floated in the void wearing a Guardian stealth suit that made him invisible to every form of detection the Devourers possessed. Through his helmet's advanced sensors, he watched the enemy fleet tear itself apart with the satisfaction of a man who had just completed an impossible mission. "Guardian actual to all teams," he transmitted through quantum-encrypted channels. "Primary objectives complete. 12 queen ships confirmed destroyed. Secondary biological agents showing excellent propagation rates across remaining fleet elements." The responses came back one by one as his teams checked in from their extraction points throughout the debris field. Each Guardian had survived the infiltration and egress phase, though several reported close calls as the dying bioships had convulsed around them. "Guardian 6 reporting successful extraction," came Marcus Kane's voice. "Bioship target is entering final death spiral. Warrior drones in this sector have completely lost cohesion." "Guardian 7 confirms similar results," added Sarah Cross. "The biological agents are spreading faster than projected. I'm seeing secondary failures in ships that weren't even targeted." Mitchell nodded with grim satisfaction. The nanoscale biological weapons had been designed to spread through the Devourers' shared biosystems, turning their own interconnected nature against them. What had made them strong as a species, their ability to share resources and information through biological networks, was now becoming their greatest weakness. "Guardian 12 to actual," came the voice of Lieutenant Commander Elena Vasquez. "I'm reading massive energy spikes from the remaining queen ships. They're trying to isolate their sections from the spreading contamination." "Understood," Mitchell replied. "Maintain observation positions and prepare for Phase 3. If any queen ships attempt to break away from the formation, we light them up with long-range charges." The Guardians had come prepared for multiple contingencies. If the biological weapons failed to propagate through the entire fleet, they had backup plans involving antimatter charges, gravitational disruptors, and weapons that most Galactic Coalition species considered war crimes. Humanity had spent 50 years studying the Devourer threat in secret, preparing for this exact scenario. Aboard her dying ship, Sub-Queen Cathara was discovering just how thoroughly her species had been outmaneuvered. The biological agents were unlike anything she had encountered before. They consumed organic matter at the molecular level while perfectly mimicking beneficial bacteria. Her ship's immune system couldn't identify them as threats until it was far too late. All Queens, "Emergency severance protocol," she broadcast through the failing network. "Cut all bio-neural links to infected sections. Preserve core functions only." But her words reached fewer and fewer listeners with each passing moment. The fleet that had numbered 3,000 ships an hour ago was down to less than 800 functional vessels, and that number was dropping rapidly. Through her ship's dying sensors, Cathara detected something that made her ancient mind reel with confusion. Small objects were moving through the fleet, not ships, but individual entities wearing some kind of technological enhancement. They moved with purpose and coordination that spoke of intelligence, but they were so small that they barely registered as threats. "Impossible," she whispered into her ship's bio-neural network. "Individual entities cannot survive in void space. No species possesses such technology." But as she watched, one of the small objects approached a wounded bioship and attached something to its hull. Seconds later, the entire vessel erupted in a cascade of explosions that tore through its internal structure like wildfire. For the first time in 8 centuries of conquest, Sub-Queen Cathara felt something she had never experienced before: fear. The human responsible for destroying that bioship was Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, and she was having the time of her life. After 6 years of training for this mission, including simulated combat in environments that regularly killed other Guardian candidates, she was finally getting to put her skills to use against the galaxy's greatest threat. "Guardian 9 to actual," she transmitted as she maneuvered toward her next target. "Delivered antimatter charge to priority target Beta 7. Ship is breaking apart as expected." Her suit's heads-up display showed dozens of potential targets throughout the collapsing Devourer formation. Bioships that had survived the initial biological weapon attack were now trying to escape the contaminated fleet, but they were moving too slowly and in too much panic to avoid the Guardians hunting them. "Copy that, Guardian 9, came Mitchell's response. "You're clear to engage targets of opportunity. Remember, we want 0 survivors. These things adapt too quickly to let any escape." Santos activated her suit's micro-thrusters and accelerated toward a bioship that was attempting to break away from the formation. The vessel was roughly the size of a Coalition cruiser, its living hull pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that might have been beautiful under different circumstances. As she approached the ship, her suit's sensors detected the presence of a sub-queen entity within its central chamber. Not as powerful as the primary queens they had already eliminated, but still capable of controlling thousands of warrior drones if allowed to escape. Santos attached a quantum disruptor to the ship's hull and activated the timer. Unlike the initial infiltration charges, this one was designed for external detonation. The bioship's outer defenses couldn't adapt quickly enough to prevent the quantum cascade that would tear through its nervous system. The explosion was visible across several light minutes, as the bioship's death scream created electromagnetic pulses that interfered with nearby ships' sensors. Santos was already moving toward her next target before the debris had finished expanding. Meanwhile, throughout the fleet, the remaining Guardians were conducting similar hunting operations. Each team had specific sectors to clear, and they moved through the dying Devourer formation like antibodies through an infected bloodstream. The Coalition species monitoring the battle from their distant observation posts were witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. A fleet that had consumed dozens of worlds and killed trillions of sentient beings was being systematically destroyed by fewer than 100 individual entities. "This is impossible," Admiral Nexus transmitted from his monitoring station. "Our sensors show the human entities are operating individually in hard vacuum with no visible life support. How are they surviving?" "More importantly," added Captain Vorthak, "how are they moving so quickly between targets? Some of them are covering thousands of kilometers in minutes." The answer to both questions lay in technology that humanity had developed in absolute secret over the past 50 years. The Guardian suits were marvels of engineering that incorporated advances in nanotechnology, quantum mechanics, and biological enhancement that the Coalition species hadn't even theorized about. Each suit was essentially a miniature spacecraft that could sustain its wearer indefinitely in any environment. They incorporated adaptive camouflage systems that could fool any known sensor technology, propulsion systems that approached the theoretical limits of physics, and weapons that could destroy targets many times their size. But the suits were only part of the equation. The humans wearing them had been selected from the absolute elite of their species' military forces and then enhanced through training regimens that regularly killed volunteers. They could operate independently for weeks without support, make tactical decisions in microseconds, and coordinate complex operations through quantum-encrypted communication networks. In essence, humanity had turned 12 teams of their best soldiers into something approaching forces of nature. Back aboard the dying Eternal Hunger, Sub-Queen Cathara was facing the end of everything her species had built over millions of years. The contamination had spread through 90% of her ship's systems, and she could feel her consciousness fragmenting as neural pathways dissolved around her. Through her failing sensors, she detected one of the small human entities approaching her ship. Part of her wanted to flood the surrounding space with bioacid in a final gesture of defiance, but she found herself oddly curious about these creatures that had achieved what no species in the galaxy had ever managed. "Human entity," she broadcast through her ship's external communication array. "I acknowledge your victory. Before I die, tell me, how many of your kind participated in this battle?" The response came through her ship's receivers, carrying the voice of Colonel Mitchell. 12 teams, 72 individuals total." Cathara's massive intellect, even in its dying state, struggled to process this information. 72 entities destroyed a fleet of 3,000 ships? "We didn't destroy your fleet," Mitchell corrected her, his voice carrying across the void with mechanical precision. "We removed your command structure and let your own biology do the rest. Your species' greatest strength became its greatest weakness." The Sub-Queen was silent for several moments as she contemplated this. When she spoke again, her mental voice carried something that might have been respect. "Your species understands warfare in ways we never considered. We consumed worlds and believed ourselves apex predators, but you are something else entirely." "We're survivors," Mitchell replied simply. "We evolved on a world where everything was trying to kill us, so we learned to be very good at killing back. The difference is we also learned when to stop." "And will you stop now?" Cathara asked as her ship's systems entered final collapse. "Will you spare the scattered survivors?" The silence stretched for nearly a minute before Mitchell responded. "No. Your species chose genocide as a way of life. The galaxy will never be safe as long as any of you exist. This isn't revenge, it's pest control." Sub-Queen Cathara's death came quietly, her consciousness simply fading away as the last of her bio-neural connections dissolved. Around her, the Eternal Hunger began its final death spiral, joining the thousands of other bioship corpses that now littered the space between stars. Within 6 hours of the Guardian assault, the Devourer fleet had been completely eliminated. The biological weapons had spread through the entire formation, while Guardian teams had hunted down the few ships that had tried to escape. Not a single organism had survived to threaten the galaxy again. The Guardians themselves rendezvoused at extraction coordinates where stealth ships waited to collect them. As they were picked up one by one from the debris field, they carried with them data and biological samples that would help humanity prepare for whatever threat might emerge from the void next. Colonel Mitchell was the last Guardian to be extracted, and as his transport ship turned toward Earth, he took one final look at the battlefield. Thousands of bioships that had once terrorized the galaxy now drifted as lifeless hulks, their organic hulls already beginning to decay in the cold of space. "Guardian actual to Terra Command," he transmitted as his ship entered hyperspace. "Mission complete. The Devourer threat has been permanently eliminated. All Guardian personnel accounted for and returning home." The response from Earth carried undertones of satisfaction and relief. "Outstanding work, Colonel. The galaxy owes humanity a debt it can never repay." Mitchell smiled grimly as he settled back in his acceleration couch. "They don't owe us anything. We just proved that when the impossible is necessary, humanity doesn't send fleets or armies. We send the Guardians." In the weeks that followed, the Galactic Coalition would struggle to understand what they had witnessed. 72 humans had accomplished what their combined fleets of millions couldn't even attempt. The implications would reshape galactic politics and force every species to reconsider their assumptions about warfare technology and the strange hairless apes from the third planet of a yellow star. But that was a problem for politicians and diplomats. The Guardians had completed their mission and were already preparing for whatever threat might emerge from the darkness next. Because somewhere in the vast cosmos, other horrors were surely stirring, and when they came, they would learn the same lesson the Devourers had learned too late. Humanity's Guardians were always watching, always ready, and absolutely relentless in the defense of innocent life. The galaxy was a much safer place with them on patrol, even if most of its inhabitants would never know they existed.